The mystery of Jeremy Hawkins' disappearance remains unsolved, even years later. An experienced hiker, known for his unmatched survival skills and profound love for the wild, vanished without a trace one autumn day in 2015. He was alone in the dense Ponderosa Pines wilderness, an area he had navigated countless times before. His disappearance seemed inexplicable until one eerie detail was uncovered. His watch had stopped at exactly 3:42 p.m., the same moment he likely lost his life. What happened in those final moments? What caused his watch, a reliable tool he'd depended on for years, to freeze at that precise time? These are questions that continue to haunt those who knew Jeremy, and they're questions that no one has been able to answer. Was it a tragic accident, an encounter with something more sinister? Or was Jeremy Hawkins the victim of a force that no one could predict? Could there be a connection between the moment his watch stopped and his mysterious fate? In this chilling investigation, we dive deep into the facts, theories, and the disturbing unanswered questions surrounding Jeremy Hawkins' untimely death. Stay tuned as we explore a case that will keep you wondering, is there a dark truth lurking in the woods, waiting to be uncovered? Before we begin, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for more spine-chilling true crime stories from Criminal Minds archives. On a crisp fall morning in October 2015, Jeremy Hawkins, a 37-year-old seasoned hiker, set out for a solo trip into the Ponderosa Pines wilderness in Northern California. Jeremy wasn't just any hiker. He was known for his unmatched survival skills, a wealth of experience in navigating even the harshest terrains, and a deep, almost spiritual connection with the wilderness. For years, he'd explored these woods, sharing his stories on his popular blog, where he documented every hike, every survival tactic, and every unforgettable moment he spent in nature. At 7 a.m., Jeremy sent a text to his girlfriend, Ellie, a simple message that reassured her. "Heading out, should be back by 6 p.m. Don't worry, I'll be fine." Those were the last words anyone would hear from him. By 7 p.m., Ellie's concern turned to worry. She tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. By 10 p.m., she was in full-blown panic mode. Jeremy was always punctual. He would have returned by now, no matter the circumstances. She dialed the authorities. The next morning, a search party was quickly organized. Local law enforcement, volunteer groups, and even friends of Jeremy's from the hiking community began combing the dense forest, searching for any sign of the man who was always so prepared for the worst. But despite their efforts, there was no trace of Jeremy. His car remained parked at the trailhead, untouched, with no signs of struggle. His gear, including his backpack and compass, was nowhere to be found. The only clue they found was Jeremy's watch. It was discovered in a small clearing, a few hundred yards from where his car had been parked. The watch, a rugged, reliable piece of equipment, was completely still, and the time on it? 3:42 p.m. Why did his watch stop at that exact time? Could it be a simple malfunction, or did something more sinister happen at that precise moment? As the hours turned into days, the search for Jeremy Hawkins intensified. Local authorities, volunteer groups, and a few close friends of Jeremy's, including fellow hikers who had trekked alongside him in the past, formed search parties and scoured the Ponderosa Pines wilderness. They searched through the dense underbrush, across rocky ravines, and along the narrow trails Jeremy was known to take. But the deeper they went into the forest, the more they were confronted with a creeping realization. Something was terribly wrong. It was as if Jeremy had simply vanished into thin air. Jeremy was no amateur when it came to the outdoors. He had hiked all over the country and had successfully navigated more challenging terrains than the Ponderosa Pines. His ability to read maps, follow weather patterns, and use nature as a guide had made him a respected figure in the hiking community. If anyone could have found his way out of the wilderness, it was Jeremy. But weeks passed, and the search teams came up empty-handed. There were no clues, no signs of struggle, and no tracks leading away from the trail. It was as if Jeremy had never been there. Local authorities brought in dogs, hoping to pick up his scent, but even they failed. The forest seemed to swallow his presence completely, as though it was hiding him from the world. The only item found in the search, and the only physical evidence that Jeremy had ever stepped foot into the woods of that day was his watch, discovered in a small clearing several miles from his last known position. The watch, a durable, high-end model, was found lying face up in the grass, its hands frozen at exactly 3:42 p.m. There were no other signs of Jeremy's gear nearby. No backpack, no water bottle, no compass, nothing that could explain where he had gone. The watch, seemingly unaffected by the elements, had been left behind, a chilling clue that raised more questions than it answered. The police, initially optimistic that the watch would lead them to Jeremy, soon began to question the significance of the time on the watch. 3:42 p.m. Was it merely a coincidence? Or was there something more to it? Could it be that Jeremy had encountered something in the woods at exactly that time, something that caused the watch to stop? Could there be a connection between the moment his watch stopped and the mystery of his disappearance? Ellie, his girlfriend, could hardly contain her growing anxiety. In the days following Jeremy's disappearance, she spent hours trying to understand why Jeremy, the man she knew so well, would go missing without a trace. She'd listened to his stories of past hikes, his recounting of close calls in dangerous terrains, but he always made it back. So why hadn't he returned this time? The police were stumped. Without any physical evidence of foul play and with no leads to follow, the case began to turn cold. But Detective Karen Holt, who was assigned to the case, refused to give up. As the days passed, she pored over every piece of evidence, no matter how small. She examined the watch meticulously, hoping to find something that could explain why it had stopped at exactly 3:42 p.m. She spoke with everyone Jeremy had known, from Ellie to his friends, colleagues, and even fellow hikers who had shared trails with him in the past. But there were no answers. Holt decided to expand the search. She brought in experts in wilderness survival, hoping that their experience might uncover something overlooked by others. For days, they scoured the area again, looking for hidden caves, abandoned cabins, or any sign that Jeremy had encountered something or someone that could have led to his disappearance. But once again, they came up empty. As the days turned into weeks, rumors began to swirl among the locals. Some believed that Jeremy had simply run off, perhaps tired of the pressures of his life and looking for a fresh start. But those who knew him best couldn't believe it. Jeremy was a man of discipline, structure, and passion for the outdoors. His disappearance didn't feel like a voluntary choice. It felt like something had taken him, something had stopped him in his tracks. But could something so mysterious happen in the woods? Could there be an unknown threat, an animal, or an unexplained phenomenon that caused Jeremy's disappearance? What if the forest itself was hiding something? What if the events of that day were the result of a tragic accident, or worse, something more sinister that still lurked in those woods, waiting for its next victim? As weeks passed and the search for Jeremy grew colder, Detective Karen Holt found herself grappling with the few elusive clues she had. The forest seemed to hold its secrets tightly, and the further she delved into Jeremy's life, the more questions arose, leading to dead ends. But Holt was a seasoned investigator, and she knew that sometimes the smallest details could unlock the darkest mysteries. Jeremy's family and friends were all shocked. He was a man who never took unnecessary risks, a meticulous planner who ensured his safety in every adventure. His relationships with Ellie and his hiking companions spoke of a man who cared deeply about the people in his life. No one believed for a second that Jeremy had staged his disappearance. There were no signs of depression, no sudden financial problems, and no confrontations in his personal life that could have pushed him to leave everything behind. Holt began her investigation by interviewing Ellie, Jeremy's closest friends, and anyone who might have had insight into his mental state before the trip. Ellie recalled Jeremy's excitement about the hike, describing him as looking forward to the solitude and challenge that the Ponderosa Pines wilderness provided. They had spoken about it for weeks, planning every detail of the trip, down to the weather forecast. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and Ellie was certain that there was no reason for him to vanish. But something bothered Detective Holt. Jeremy's watch. The discovery of the watch, lying in the clearing with the hands frozen at 3:42 p.m., couldn't be ignored. Holt wasn't one to believe in coincidences, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the watch's stoppage was somehow connected to Jeremy's disappearance. At first, it was assumed that the watch simply malfunctioned. Watches can break, batteries can die, and time can stop, right? But Holt wasn't convinced. She had seen malfunctioning watches before, and they didn't stop at an exact time like this one had. It wasn't as if the watch had stopped randomly, it had stopped at a very specific moment. A moment that could hold the key to Jeremy's fate. Holt ordered an examination of the watch by an expert in timepieces. The technician found nothing unusual with the internal mechanisms. The battery was fully charged, the gears and hands functioned perfectly, and the watch showed no signs of wear or damage. The technician's report was clear. This was not a simple malfunction. The watch had stopped on its own at precisely 3:42 p.m., and it had done so without any apparent cause. It was almost as if the watch had decided to stop. Detective Holt couldn't ignore the implications. What happened to Jeremy at that exact moment? Did he encounter something or someone at 3:42 p.m. that caused the watch to stop? Was there something in the woods that day that triggered the halt in time? Was it just an unfortunate coincidence that his watch stopped at that precise moment? Or could it be a sign that something more sinister had taken place? Holt expanded her search for answers, diving deeper into Jeremy's past. She combed through his emails, his social media profiles, and his journals, hoping for any hint of a problem or conflict that could explain his disappearance. She found nothing unusual. Jeremy had led a simple life, one dedicated to his passion for hiking and his relationship with Ellie. He had no known enemies, no debts, and no mysterious past that might have caught up with him. It seemed as though Jeremy Hawkins was a man without secrets. Then, an unexpected lead came through. A hiker, a local man named Jared Simmons, came forward with a strange account. Simmons claimed to have seen a figure in the woods near where Jeremy's watch was found. He was walking the trail a few days after Jeremy's disappearance when he noticed someone standing in the distance hidden among the trees. Simmons described the figure as tall, cloaked in dark clothing, and standing unnaturally still. When Simmons called out, the figure vanished into the forest without a sound. At first, Holt dismissed the sighting as nothing more than a paranoid hiker's imagination. But the more she thought about it, the more she wondered if it was more than just coincidence. Could this figure have had something to do with Jeremy's disappearance? Could it be someone who had been in the area at the same time, perhaps even watching Jeremy? Despite the lack of physical evidence, Holt began to entertain the idea that someone or something had been involved in Jeremy's disappearance. But who could it be? And why would they take Jeremy and leave behind no trace? Why wasn't there a struggle? Where was his gear? And most chilling of all, why had his watch stopped at exactly 3:42 p.m.? Theories began to swirl. Could it have been an animal attack? The area was home to mountain lions and bears, but no signs of animal tracks or scratches had been found near the watch. Could it have been another hiker, someone with ill intentions who preyed on Jeremy's solitude? The idea seemed plausible, but the lack of physical evidence, no struggle, no blood, no missing items made that theory unlikely. Then there was the darker possibility. What if the forest itself was hiding something? Some locals spoke of strange occurrences in the Ponderosa Pines, stories of people getting lost in the woods, only to reappear with no memory of what had happened. Stories of hikers who vanished without a trace, their bodies never found, their equipment left untouched. Had Jeremy fallen victim to something beyond human explanation? Had he encountered something supernatural, something lurking in the shadows of the forest, waiting to claim another victim? Detective Holt wasn't ready to entertain the supernatural explanation just yet. But the mystery of Jeremy Hawkins' disappearance continued to eat at her. There was too much that didn't add up, too many unanswered questions that refused to fade away. The closer she got to the truth, the more elusive it became. What could have happened to Jeremy at 3:42 p.m.? Was it an accident? A criminal act? Or was there something darker at play, something hidden in the depths of the Ponderosa Pines? With the investigation reaching a standstill, Detective Holt began to sift through every possible theory, no matter how strange or unlikely. As she pieced together the fragments of evidence, the questions multiplied. What had happened to Jeremy Hawkins? Where had he gone? Why had his watch stopped at exactly 3:42 p.m.? Several theories emerged, each more perplexing than the last. Holt knew that in a case like this, the answer could be hiding in the smallest of details. The more she dug, the more she felt that this was no ordinary disappearance. Something unusual had happened, and it was up to her to uncover the truth. The most straightforward explanation was that Jeremy had suffered some kind of accident while hiking. Perhaps he had slipped and fallen in one of the more treacherous areas of the forest, sustaining an injury that rendered him unconscious or incapacitated. The theory suggested that his watch could have stopped when he fell, or perhaps when he passed out, and that he simply never regained consciousness. At first, this seemed plausible. After all, accidents in the wilderness were common. But the more Holt thought about it, the more this theory seemed to fall apart. Why was there no evidence of a fall? No broken branches, no torn clothing, no skid marks in the dirt? The area where his watch was found was relatively clear, and there were no signs of struggle. It seemed unlikely that Jeremy had been injured in such a way that he simply died without a trace. Could an accident explain everything? Or was there something else that prevented Jeremy from coming back? The second theory involved foul play, the possibility that someone had intentionally harmed Jeremy. Was there another hiker in the woods that day? Could they have been lurking nearby, waiting for the right moment to strike? This theory suggested that Jeremy may have been targeted, either by a stranger or by someone who had crossed paths with him in the past. But why had his gear been left behind? Why wasn't there a struggle? There were no signs of a confrontation, no physical evidence to suggest that Jeremy had fought back. And then there was the watch. The timepiece with its hands frozen at 3:42 p.m. remained an anomaly in this theory. If this was a deliberate act, why would his watch stop so precisely? It was as if time itself had been suspended at that moment. Detective Holt wondered, could there be something more behind the idea of foul play? Something more sinister? Perhaps something that couldn't be easily explained? Another theory that gained traction was the possibility of a wild animal attack. Ponderosa Pines was home to a variety of dangerous wildlife, including mountain lions and bears. Could Jeremy have been attacked by one of these predators, caught off guard in the dense forest? While animal attacks were certainly a danger in the area, the lack of physical evidence, such as claw marks, bite wounds, or scat, cast doubt on this theory. Wild animals would leave some trace behind, even if Jeremy had tried to defend himself. Moreover, there were no signs of a struggle. The only clue found was his watch, and it didn't fit the pattern of a typical animal attack. Was it possible that Jeremy encountered a wild animal, but it didn't leave any obvious traces? Or was this theory just too far-fetched to explain what had happened? Then there was the darker theory, one that the locals in the town whispered about when they thought no one was listening. Some believed that the Ponderosa Pines was cursed, a place where inexplicable things happened, where people vanished without a trace, and where the forest itself seemed to have a life of its own. In fact, there were rumors of strange disappearances in the area long before Jeremy's case. Hikers who had ventured too deep into the woods often returned with eerie tales of hearing voices, feeling like they were being watched, or encountering strange figures that seemed to vanish before their eyes. Some believed that Jeremy had stumbled upon something or someone in the forest that afternoon. What if the strange figure that Jared Simmons had seen, lurking in the trees, wasn't just a figment of his imagination? What if it was something real? Was it possible that Jeremy had encountered something supernatural, something that wasn't of this world? Holt felt a shiver run down her spine as she considered this theory. Could Jeremy have crossed paths with something that defied explanation? Could his watch have stopped, not because of a malfunction, but because it was the moment he was taken by something beyond human understanding? Is it possible that Jeremy's death was the result of a supernatural force? Could there be something in those woods that we are not meant to understand? As the investigation deepened, a fifth and more chilling theory began to emerge. What if the forest itself was responsible for Jeremy's disappearance? Some hikers spoke of a strange energy in the woods, an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to draw people in, and then, just as suddenly, swallow them whole. Could there be an unseen force in the woods, a magnetic or natural phenomenon that had caused Jeremy to disappear at that precise moment? This theory wasn't easy to accept, but the more Holt thought about the circumstances of Jeremy's disappearance, the watch stopping, the lack of physical evidence, the strange sightings, the more it seemed like an unsettling possibility. The idea that there was something in the forest that could pull someone out of reality, stopping time for them, was both fascinating and terrifying. Could it be that Jeremy's death wasn't an accident, murder, or attack, but something entirely different? What if Jeremy had encountered something ancient, something that had existed long before humans set foot in those woods? What if there was a force in those woods, something that played with time and space? Could it have been responsible for taking Jeremy? And could it still be out there, waiting for its next victim? Weeks turned into months, and as time passed, the search for Jeremy Hawkins started to fade into the background. The authorities had exhausted all leads, and the case was slipping further into cold file obscurity. Detective Holt, however, refused to give up. Something about the case, something about Jeremy's disappearance kept nagging at her. The watch, the time, the strange figure in the woods. The questions had piled up, each one more unsettling than the last. She knew there had to be something more to the story. Then out of nowhere came a break. A hiker, a local man named George Ellis, had been exploring a part of the Ponderosa Pines that hadn't been searched thoroughly before. He was part of a group of volunteers who had joined the renewed search efforts, and though they had covered large sections of the wilderness, they had missed this small, isolated patch of land. George, an experienced outdoorsman, wandered deeper into the forest, his eyes scanning the surroundings for anything unusual. It was there that he stumbled across something that would change everything: an abandoned cabin, hidden among the thick trees, almost entirely consumed by overgrown vegetation. The cabin wasn't on any of the official maps of the forest, and none of the search teams had found it in previous weeks. It seemed untouched by time, as if it had been forgotten for years. But inside the cabin, something more startling was found. George immediately contacted the authorities, and Detective Holt was the first to arrive. The air in the cabin was thick with dust, and the light streaming in through the cracked windows barely illuminated the interior. Yet in the corner of the room, there was a familiar sight: Jeremy's backpack. It was lying near the fireplace, the contents mostly intact, but with one major thing missing: his compass. The bag had been rifled through, but there were no other signs of foul play. Holt knelt down beside the bag, her mind racing. Could this cabin have been where Jeremy had taken refuge? Had he been hiding here for some unknown reason? Or had someone brought him to this place? The lack of blood or other evidence of harm suggested he had either left willingly or was dragged away. The cabin itself gave off an eerie vibe, and as Holt explored it further, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine: a logbook. The leather-bound book was ancient-looking, the pages yellowed with age. She flipped through the pages, which were filled with notes from previous occupants, strange, cryptic entries, many of which didn't make sense. But one entry stood out to Holt. "Yonter, something is watching me. 3:42 p.m., I need to leave." The words hit her like a hammer. The timestamp, 3:42 p.m. This was no coincidence. Jeremy had been here. Had he written these words himself? The logbook was a chilling new piece of evidence. But what did it mean? Why had Jeremy felt the need to write that particular time down? Had he known something was coming for him at that precise moment? The detective's mind raced as she pieced together the pieces of this new puzzle. Could Jeremy have been trying to document something before it was too late? Was he being stalked by someone or something in the woods? The logbook, however, didn't stop there. More disturbing entries followed, each one more cryptic than the last, as if Jeremy was descending into paranoia the longer he stayed in the cabin. He spoke of hearing strange noises at night, of seeing shadows moving in the forest, and of a figure that he described as both human and not. "Something that's not supposed to be here," he had written. The last entry, which appeared to be Jeremy's final note, was nothing short of chilling. In 3:42 p.m. "I saw it. I can't stay here. It's too late." The handwriting was shaky, rushed. It was clear that Jeremy had been terrified by whatever he had seen in those woods. Holt felt her stomach twist. What had Jeremy encountered at that exact moment? The watch stopping at 3:42 p.m., the strange figure in the woods, the cryptic notes. Everything seemed to point to one thing: whatever had happened to Jeremy. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just a simple case of foul play. It was something far darker, something more incomprehensible than anything Holt had dealt with before. But what was it? Holt knew she had to find out more. She couldn't let the case slip away. There had to be answers hidden in the shadows of that cabin, and she was determined to find them. She reached out to a local historian who specialized in the region's folklore and strange occurrences. The historian, a woman named Lucy Chambers, spoke of old myths surrounding the Ponderosa Pines. The stories were mostly dismissed as local legends, but some were too strange to ignore. Tales of people vanishing without a trace, of figures seen in the forest that could never be explained, and of the very land itself seeming to shift when the time was right. Lucy recounted stories of hikers who had entered the Ponderosa Pines only to reappear days later, unable to remember what had happened to them. They spoke of being lost in time, of hearing voices calling their names, and of experiencing strange phenomena they couldn't explain. Some of them even mentioned a time, 3:42 p.m., as a moment when everything seemed to change. Holt listened carefully. She was a skeptic, but the pieces of this puzzle were starting to fit together in ways that she couldn't ignore. Had Jeremy unknowingly wandered into a place where time itself was twisted? Was there something in those woods that made time stop? Or did it control the people who ventured there? Could the forest itself be the key to solving this mystery? With the discovery of Jeremy's final note in the logbook, the case had reached a new level of intensity. Detective Holt felt as though she was standing on the edge of something monumental, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing the final piece of the puzzle. The investigation into Jeremy's disappearance had gone from a missing persons case to something much more disturbing. The strange time, the cryptic notes, the unexplained figure in the woods, everything pointed to something beyond normal explanation. As Holt stared at the final entry in Jeremy's logbook, a sinking feeling took hold of her. Jeremy's words, written in haste and fear, rang in her ears. "I saw it. I can't stay here. It's too late." But what had he seen? And what did he mean by too late? Had he encountered something so terrifying that he believed his life was in imminent danger? The notion seemed impossible, but the evidence was overwhelming. His watch had stopped at precisely 3:42 p.m., and now this. The words in the logbook had begun to feel like a final confession, a last attempt to communicate the unimaginable. Holt reached out to Lucy Chambers, the local historian who had shared the legends of the Ponderosa Pines. Lucy, sensing the detective's urgency, met with her at the cabin to discuss the lore surrounding the area. As they sat in the dimly lit room, Lucy spoke of the ancient tales that had been passed down through generations, stories of a strange force, an entity that lived within the forest, its origins lost to time. It was said to manipulate time, to trap those who ventured too far within its grasp, leading them to disappear without explanation. Some spoke of the Watcher, a dark, shadowy figure that observed those who entered the forest, drawing them deeper into its mysterious heart. "You've heard the stories, haven't you?" Lucy asked. Her voice was soft, but there was a sharp edge to her words. "The ones that talk about the forest itself. Something alive in there." Holt nodded slowly. She had heard the whispers, but always dismissed them as nothing more than superstition. But now, after everything she had uncovered, the idea didn't seem so far-fetched. Jeremy was smart. He wasn't the type to get caught in a trap, especially not one like that. But what if he came across something that wasn't supposed to be in this world? Lucy continued, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. Something that made him lose track of time. Something that controlled him, or worse, took him. The detective's mind raced. Could this be the answer? Had Jeremy encountered something so unnatural that his very perception of time had been altered? She looked back at the logbook, 3:42 p.m., the moment everything changed. What if the time had been a marker? A threshold that Jeremy crossed when he encountered whatever had been watching him from the shadows. Holt felt a wave of unease wash over her. She knew she was close, but what could she do with this knowledge? How could she explain it to anyone else when there was no evidence, no tangible proof to back up such an extraordinary theory? Lucy's words lingered in her mind. It's too late. Too late for what? Too late to leave the woods? Too late to escape whatever force had claimed Jeremy? Holt didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. Jeremy had found something in the Ponderosa Pines, something that defied logic, and he hadn't made it out alive. There was still no body, no definitive cause of death, and no direct evidence of what had happened to Jeremy. But the eerie note in the logbook and the mysterious circumstances of his disappearance could no longer be ignored. Something had happened at 3:42 p.m., something that not only stopped his watch, but also changed the course of his fate. The case remained officially unsolved, and the search for Jeremy Hawkins would eventually be called off. But the questions lingered. Was there a natural explanation for what happened to Jeremy? Had he simply met a tragic fate in the wilderness? Or had something more sinister, more inexplicable, occurred that day in the forest? Despite the lack of closure, Detective Holt couldn't help but feel the weight of the unanswered questions. She knew there was more to the story than anyone could comprehend. She had spent months trying to find an answer, but the forest had kept its secrets well hidden. To this day, Jeremy's disappearance remains one of the most puzzling cases in the history of Ponderosa Pines. The only physical evidence left behind was his watch, stopped at exactly 3:42 p.m. in his final cryptic note in the cabin. Some say he crossed into something he shouldn't have, a force or entity that manipulated time itself. Others believe it was an unfortunate accident that can never fully be explained. What happened to Jeremy Hawkins that afternoon? Was it a strange twist of fate, or was there something out there in the woods that no one was meant to understand? The truth remains hidden in the shadows of the Ponderosa Pines, waiting for the next person daring enough to find it. Thank you for following along with this chilling investigation into the mysterious disappearance of Jeremy Hawkins. Do you think there's something supernatural lurking in the Ponderosa Pines? Or was it a simple accident that no one will ever fully understand? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for more spine-tingling true crime stories from Criminal Minds archives. Stay tuned, and remember, some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved.